Broncos fans, I have a question. When it comes to Nick Bonito or Courtland Sutton, who deserves a contract extension more? We'll answer that question right now. It is NFL Combine week, and man, felt like this week's dragged on a little bit, but we're finally going to start to get some action out there in Indianapolis. The big, giant human beings are going to put on their wrestling outfits and then run around and exercise really, really hard for everybody out there. I can't wait to see it. But what we've learned this week from Sean Payton meeting the media on Tuesday, George Paton meeting the media on Tuesday as well, we learned about their priorities or lack thereof to extend their own guys, their own pending free agents. And the two that we're going to talk about in Courtland Sutton and Nick Bonito aren't going to be free agents when the new league year starts here when the calendar turns to March, but they will be at that time next year. So who deserves an extension more? And look, when you're commenting, love that you comment, say hello, tell me what you think. I'll try to circle back and have a conversation with you in the comments. But for this conversation, this game that we're playing, it's not both. The chances of it being both, probably pretty good. I would think so anyway, based off what we've learned from George and Sean Payton. But for this conversation, we're picking the one, if it were only one, that we would want it to be. Nick Bonito or Courtland Sutton. All right, let's make a case for Court first. Courtland Sutton is coming off two great football seasons. A year ago, when it was Captain Cliche Russell Wilson as the quarterback for the Denver Broncos, he had double-digit touchdowns. 10 touchdowns for Courtland Sutton on a football team that wasn't any good, with a quarterback that wasn't any good in Russell Wilson. But the connection between the two was absolutely outstanding. And he had 10 touchdowns. So fast forward, they draft Bo Nix. They have a real quarterback. They're running a real offense, not just backyard football, throw it up and let the tall guy catch it. That's what Russ and Courtland were doing, and they had some success. But with a real quarterback and a real offense, Courtland Sutton became the first Broncos wide receiver to achieve 1,000 yards in a season since Courtland Sutton did it back in 2019. So that is a big mark for Courtland Sutton. And if you put those 2 years together, right? A year ago with Russ, 10 touchdowns. This year with Bo Nix, over 1,000 yards receiving. If you put those 2 years together, Courtland Sutton is a top 10 to 13 wide receiver in the NFL. And I know we live in a what have you done for me lately society, right? So that matters. You can't just write that part off. But if you take a step back, right, and you take the 25,000 foot view, you're standing at the top of the mountain and you're looking at Courtland Sutton's career as a whole. Well, since 2018, he's like 22nd in yards receiving yards. And in touchdowns, he's like 24th. Don't quote me on those numbers, but he's anywhere between 22 and 25. Collectively, the whole picture. So who is Courtland Sutton? Is he the guy that we watched the last couple of years? All right, if that's the dude, he probably does deserve a $20 to $23 million a year contract. Or is he that guy that he was the previous handful of years in his NFL life? And now the team was bad. The quarterback play was absolutely terrible. That's a part of the conversation. I lean more towards Courtland being the guy we've seen the last couple of years. But I can't get out of my head that the dude's going to be 30. I can't get out of my head that Father Time's undefeated and the wide receiver production, it drops off after that player turns 30, 31 years old, and Sutton's not that far away. So the case for Courtland is the last 2 years. He has been a top 14 receiver in the NFL. We'll throw 14 for the jersey number there. So that gets guys paid. But is he that guy for real? And can he maintain that through the life of what an extension would look like? We'll talk about what those extensions looks like in a couple of minutes. Now let's make the case for young Nick Bonito, the pass rusher, right? That had 2 defensive touchdowns this year, 13 and a half sacks, which put him in the top 5 in the NFL. He was a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. Now, his own teammate beat him, which was Pat Surtain, very warranted for PS2, who's a lockdown corner on the outside. Nick Bonito is certainly extension worthy. What does that look like? Why is his case better than that of Courtland Sutton? Well, first and foremost, he's a pass rusher. That is more important than wide receiver. If you're building a football team, right, offensive line, defensive line, corners, pass rushers, quarterback's up higher than that. But then you get to wide receiver. So pass pass rusher is more important than the position of wide receiver. And by the way, he's still a younger dude. So Courtland, you extend him for 2 or 3 years. You have to worry about what that second to last year and the final year looks like from a production standpoint. With Nick Bonito, you extend Nick Bonito for 3 or 4 years, you should know, based off what he was in this last season, that's the guy that you can get, should be getting for the life of that second contract for Nick Bonito because he is so much younger. By the way, you've already re-upped with Jonathan Cooper on the other side, so you got the little duo. You have Jonah Ellis as a rookie that I think is going to be a big-time player in this league. You're putting other pieces around Nick Bonito that's going to allow Nick to be the same player that he was. So good cases for both, right? Which one are you going to pick? And what does money look like? Because money's a part of that equation too. I just mentioned it, $20 to $22 million for Courtland Sutton. That's a huge pay raise from what he's getting right now, which is about $14 million. The course, over 2 or 3 years, we're talking about $12 to $18 million extra he would get with that raise. Now with Nick Bonito, I just told you, Courtland Sutton, even his last 2 years, it doesn't put him in the top 10 as far as wide receivers go. I just mentioned Nick's sack numbers. That puts him in the top 3, top 5 at the minimum. That is where you're going to have to break the bank. The extension of Jonathan Cooper that was 3 years off the top of my head, I believe around $60 million. Not doing that to Nick Bonito. That doesn't even start the conversation. I mean, we're talking about a 4-year, $90 million deal for a guy like Nick Bonito, especially if he comes out this year and in the first 5 or 6 weeks, he's got 5 or 6 sacks, 4, 5, 6 sacks, going to be on pace to be a double-digit sack player for the second consecutive year. You got to break the bank for those type of fellas. So Courtland's older, Nick's younger, but Nick is going to cost you a little bit more. How much does that fit into the equation? Here's what I would boil it down to. I have my reservations about Courtland Sutton. I've talked about it on the radio show with Cecil Lammy over and over. Him and I are a little different on how we see Courtland Sutton. A part of me, and especially if I were wearing my GM hat and I'm George Paton down there, I would almost play the game with Courtland Sutton. I might give him a bunch of incentives. If you remember last year, that's how they got him to come back from his little miniature holdout, was give him, 4 incentives that could earn about $2 million. And he hit all of those. So kudos to Courtland Sutton for doing so. Maybe you ramp that up a little bit more, and those $2 million incentives look more like $5 million incentives if he can do it again. And then, Courtland, you're going to be upset. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to hold out at 30? Out of sight, out of mind would be a real problem for Courtland Sutton if that was the route that he would take. And I don't think he would. I think his agent's too smart for that, and I think Courtland's too smart for that. So if George Paton wanted to play a little hardball, he could do that with Courtland Sutton. I'm not sure he could do it with a guy like Nick Bonito. So if I had to pick one, my answer today, it's not Courtland Sutton. I'm giving the extension to Nick Bonito. Pass rusher is more important than wide receiver. They also just drafted 2 wide receivers in Troy Franklin and Devon Bailey. Now, I know they have a ton of work to do, and I don't know that either will ever be a Courtland Sutton, but pass rusher trumps and always will wide receiver. So for me, my answer today on Dover on Denver is Nick Bonito. If I'm picking one to give an extension to right now, it's Nick Bonito over Courtland Sutton. Broncos country, what say you? I'd love to hear from you in the comment section here on our YouTube page. While you're there, like, subscribe, check out all the other great shows we have. Orange and Blue Today with Cease and Mace, Mile High Hoops with Jake, Mile High Hockey with Will, Mike Evans, everybody out there helping out. Check out what we're doing. This has been Dover on Denver, and now I'm done.